Kind of wish he hadn't said all that, you know. It's a little bit uncomfortable. There's some stuff in that passage that kind of gets under your skin a little bit, doesn't it? Well, let me start off with a story. We Presbyterians have deep ties to Scotland. The Church of Scotland is, of course, our mother church, and our denomination, while it has gotten a little more diverse in recent years, there was a point in time where most people who were Presbyterian could trace their roots all the way back to Scotland. Many of you perhaps can still do so today. And the capital city of Scotland is Edinburgh, and yes, that's the way you pronounce it. It's not Edinburgh, it's Edinburgh. And this city experienced some of its greatest days back in the 17 and 1800s. You see, back in those days, Scottish culture was reputed to be the finest in all of Europe, the crown jewel of human achievement. Scots scholars stood at the forefront of most fields of human research and knowledge: philosophy, finance, theology. You name it, the Scots had an expert. Edinburgh, in fact, was known as the Athens of the North. And a flowering of wisdom and culture was there which seemed to those who lived in those days to be comparable to the greatest days of ancient Greece. Now, one of the most important buildings there in Edinburgh is its castle. And if you stand in front of that castle today, a great deal of history is laid out at your feet. But eventually your eyes will come to rest on a small hill off from the center of town, on which stand the remains of a curious-looking building. Now, it had its roots in the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s. It was originally planned to be a memorial to the Scottish soldiers that had died there. But the good folks of Edinburgh, realizing how important they were in the world, continued to expand the idea, and they wanted to make it bigger and greater and for it to really be something so that it would eventually be a symbol of their city's greatness. It was modeled on the temples of ancient Greece. And it was meant to be this huge structure of marble and pillars. And today, if you stand there and you look at that hill, you will see a few columns that stand there. There is no more building than that. You see, it is unused and unfinished. It was meant to be a symbol of Edinburgh's greatness, but due to, listen to this, lack of funds, it was never finished. Today, in fact, it is known as Edinburgh's disgrace. It is considered a mockery of the greatness it sought to convey. So the sum of this story is this: the good people of Edinburgh failed to count the cost before building their monument. In our text today from Luke 14, we learn that there are large crowds that are beginning to follow Jesus all over the place. He's beginning to make his way down toward Jerusalem, and the story will end there in the way we know. But the crowds are beginning to come to hear him and to follow him. And one has to wonder from Jesus' reaction to these crowds if perhaps they have failed to count the cost that might be there in following him. His comments in today's text certainly seem to suggest that that is the case. Jesus turns to this crowd that's following him and he says that he wants followers who are willing to count the cost, to pay full price, in other words. Jesus is not looking for deep discount disciples. There are no sale prices on salvation, no discount outlet malls with faithfulness marked down 50%. Discipleship will require a lot. A willingness to cut family ties, to face radical self-denial, and to give up one's material possessions. Discipleship for the Christian may be difficult, painful, tough, and expensive. But Jesus wants nothing less from the travelers who are intending to follow him. Alan Culpepper of Mercer University, when commenting on this text, says this: some churches, preachers, and TV programs present the gospel as though they were selling a used car. No money down. Attractive terms, low monthly payments. They make it sound as easy as possible, as long as if there is no real commitment required of those who would follow Christ. But Jesus' call was far different. He was not looking for superficial commitment or a crowd of tag-alongs. Instead, he required his followers to be totally committed if they were going to follow at all. And even today, the call of Christ is for full-price followers, not deep discount disciples. Jesus says that no one would build a tower, except, of course, for the folks in Edinburgh, or march into battle without first estimating the full cost. And you know what? The same is true for discipleship. But what exactly does it mean to pay full price if we are to follow Christ? I want to suggest three things today. The first is this. I think it suggests that we are to strengthen faith ties. We are to strengthen faith ties. Perhaps the most shocking statement made by Jesus in this text is that disciples are to hate their fathers, mothers, wives, children, brothers, and sisters, and even life itself. My goodness, what does he mean by that? Cut your family ties, he seems to be saying, and focus only on strengthening your faith ties. However, when we begin to dig down into the Greek, we find that the word we translate hate has a little bit more nuance of meaning. It doesn't really mean anger or hostility. It suggests rather what we value most. In other words, what Christ is saying here is this: is your relationship with me the most important relationship you have? Is following me the most important thing in your life? Or is it following someone else? Who has control of your daily life, your daily living? Is it me? Or is it your neighbor? Or family member? Or someone else? Who is the most important person to you? Is it Christ? Or is it someone else? You see, a disciple has faith ties that give them purpose in life, and they follow the call of Christ, even if that may cost us in relationships, because following Christ is the most important relationship of all. Number two, we are to practice self-discipline. Practice self-discipline. Coming from someone who could stand to lose a few pounds, so I will share a particular story about that from Philip Yancey. Philip Yancey is a Christian writer, and he tells a story about a monk who was very proud about his discipline, his eating disciplines. He was very careful about what he ate. And he went in one day and he was talking to his spiritual advisor, and he began bragging about the fact that he had not eaten meat in 30 years. He is obviously not on the keto diet. He was very proud that he had been so faithful, so true, so he wanted to share that. His advisor responded, "Don't tell me that you've gone 30 years without eating meat. Tell me this instead. How many days have you spent without speaking ill of someone else? How many days have you spent without judging your neighbor? How many days have you gone without letting useless and painful words and gossip pass your lips?" Jesus calls us to carry the cross and follow him, to accept challenges, risks, and sacrifice instead of seeking out comfort. But self-discipline should be focused on constructive Christian behavior, not just on sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. As I remarked recently in Bible study, you see, if we spent all the time doing the do's, loving God and loving our neighbor like we're supposed to, we wouldn't have time to worry about all the don'ts, would we? Because we'd spend so much time doing the right things, we wouldn't even have time to do all the wrong things. Bearing the cross of Christ involves walking in the way of Christ. While a deep discount disciple might bear a little discomfort, a full-price follower knows the sacrifices and sufferings of a truly disciplined life. And finally, number 3, a true disciple shows selfless generosity. Selfless generosity. If Christians commit to generosity, we know that we have escaped the discount mall outlet mindset. If we see generosity as an opportunity to give generously and lavishly and joyfully and, yes, even recklessly, as God has given God's grace and love to us in the same fashion, then we will know our treasure is in heaven and not on some half-price rack in some store somewhere. We have discovered that the greatest joy and satisfaction come from giving to others as Jesus has given to us. So let me tell you about Eleanor Boyer. This is back in the 90s. This was up in Somerset County, New Jersey. And it had happened when I was in seminary in New Jersey back then. This story was still kind of floating around in the news, so we heard about it a little bit. Had to go back and dig it up a little bit. But let me tell you about Eleanor Boyer. She won the big money back then, in the early 90s. She won the lottery, and she got $8.5 million. Now, I know the Powerballs are bigger than that. I don't play, don't get me wrong. But she won $8.5 million. She was 73 years old at the time. And while she wanted to keep it quiet, she ended up creating a sensation by saying she was going to give the money to her church and to charity. And she did. Quickly and irrevocably. She seems to be taking literally Jesus' call to give up all your possessions. She said this, I have my pension and Social Security, I have everything I need. Why let the money sit in the bank till I die? Which explains why, writes Rick Hampson in the USA Today paper. 3 weeks after hitting the jackpot, she signed over $5.9 million to her parish. It was a large Catholic church. They compute not in members but in families. 2,800 families were members there. Church also had an elementary school and a high school. After giving that amount, she gave what was left to various charitable organizations in Somerset County, to needy individuals in her neighborhood, and to 3 nephews who were her only close relatives. What about herself? She kept very little. This is a description of her. She was still driving the same faded yellow 1969 Chevy Malibu with the peeling white vinyl roof. Remember vinyl roofs? She still wears the same sensible shoes, beige trench coat, and mustard velour hat. She still lives in the same gray house where she was born. And she truly believes that she does not need the lottery winnings. So she is using her fortune as a disciple of Christ to help others. To help others. Is it possible to pay full price to follow Christ? I don't know, but I know there's some people that have tried. People like Eleanor, Mother Teresa, and a lot of others. They proved that at least we can attempt to give God our all, whatever that all may be. Each of us in our own way are called to do some of the same things, to strengthen our faith ties and practice self-discipline and show selfless generosity. And we do not do these things to earn God's love or to earn God's grace. We do these things because God has already so freely given God's love and God's grace to us. We already have it. Now we just have to figure out what to do with it. Well, I guess that's something to think about, isn't it? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.